Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and those who are still in the corridors, take their seats. I would strongly recommend you sit in the center part and not in the aisles, because the sound is much better in the center part, plus we can reach you very easily this way. Welcome back to this fifth panel already. Before we're going to go into the details of what that panel is all about, I have a few domestic announcements to make. A phone was found, Samsung, in Dodder A, I understood. The person who has lost this phone should pay to the people who were so honest to bring it back. Anyway, the phone is here with me. It's a Samsung, I can't see which, but anyway. So if somebody has lost their phone in Dodder A, the phone is found. Secondly, and I think hugely important, tonight, we have, I already mentioned this morning, we have a reception which is hosted by the Departments of Health, of Foreign Affairs and of Trade of the Government of Ireland. And so we're all invited to be there. It's going to be a splendid evening, traditional Irish music. We already enjoyed very much the river dances, modern style, but I think the live traditional is going to be absolutely fantastic. The Minister of Health will be there, Mr. Simon Harris will be there to host this. And also the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Secretary General Niall Burgess will be there. Buses are leaving from the registration, in front of the registration exit at 6:30. So this is the official event hosted by the Government of Ireland, so everybody is warmly invited to go there and be on time. So 6:30 on, the first buses will be leaving. The event starts at 7. So tickets, if you do not have found a ticket yet, at the reception, the registration desk, there are tickets for those who have lost theirs. Don't sneak in your girlfriends. I mean, basically, the invitations are for your honor rolls only. At 5:30 in this hall, the Youth Forum, who has been deliberating very strongly over the last couple of days as well, will have their sort of sharing with whoever is interested in what they have to say, the agenda for the future. This is very nice, so basically a lot of the panels end around 5. You can then sit nicely, listen to the future generation between 5:30 and 6:30, and then 6:30 you get on the bus. So this is all a really nice sort of flow. I'm definitely going to follow that one, because after this panel, my duty as your moderator is up for today, so I'm very happy. What we're going to do this afternoon, I think, is very, very close to my heart, and to the heart of a lot of people that I know we have been talking with also in the marketplace. Because the subject of today is governance and accountability. Normally I'm expecting, improving governance and effective implementation of the global strategy to, anyway, short term, it's called the governance agenda. Now we all know that governance is being used very much, and accountability are words that are used increasingly, and they make people feel happy. If you say, well, we really find governance important, a lot of people already feel they've done a good thing by just uttering that phrase. Now what we're going to do here is build on some of the things that were exchanged in the hall, but also in the side events and also offline in the marketplace. Because for many of you, governance is not just a game. It's not just a sort of rhetorical little exercise. It is actually tough stuff. And so the topic is very close to my heart, because in my daily life now I work for WHO's Governance Collaborative, or WHO's hosted Governance Collaborative. It's a wider collaborative, and that is a collaborative that states that we should make the governance agenda much more actionable. Now again, that word also can be very hollow, and we can utter it many times, but in this 1.5 hours this afternoon, we're really going to talk about how to make governance actionable. Now, a lot of people here, privately, I'm not going to repeat private conversations here, but they have been sharing fairly bitter governance experiences. And I'm just thinking, there's a young doctor who came up to me, and we were chatting. And I'm not saying from which country, not say from where, but basically, in his own country, he tries to take into account some of the authorities and some of the practices that are actually jeopardizing also the human resources and health agenda. This gentleman is exposed to threats. He's exposed to threats to his family. He's exposed to harassment that he doesn't know where it comes from. But still, he goes on as an individual, but also because he feels supported by many others. So governance is not a rosy sort of five-star hotel topic. It is very much the hard stuff that all of us, if we're honest, will agree on, makes a lot of things slow down, and if we would do it better, would make a huge acceleration possible. So we're going to talk on the critical side, but we're also going to talk on the positive side of this agenda, and saying, okay, if we acknowledge that this is the case, that governance is important, accountability is vital, then we need to start to be very honest with each other at all levels. So we're going to try to create that atmosphere here. Now, we will be streamed, so it means the rest of the world, at some point, can see this. At the same time, I would like to make this gathering of 1.5 hours as honest as possible, because we will not move anywhere if we're not going to do this with a little bit of boldness in the positive sense of the word. So fortunately for our panel, we have 3 fantastic kick-off speakers, because we're going to make this even more interactive than before. So the first speaker that I would love to introduce is Dr. Makhanya. She's Chief Nursing Officer in the National Department of Health of South Africa. Dr. Makhanya, if you can come to the floor, I would like to give this lady a warm applause, because we're very happy that she's here. If I may say so as a fellow female, you are one of these troopers. You've been around in this arena. You've worked as a professional nurse, clinical nursing care, community nursing, education. You've been an educator yourself. You're also a member of the Council of the Durban University of Technology. So you are in all these different arenas, but besides that, you also have this high administrative role. And just recently, you've been very much involved in the discussions in the region about how to implement all the recommendations of the Commission on Human Resources for Health. And she will talk about that in a minute. So we're very, very honored and happy that you're here. Now, next, because we try to guard the gender balance, you'll see this is, again, a bit of a challenge. We have Dr. Michael Ryan. He told me not to call him Michael. He said, my mother calls me Michael, and it's often bad news if she does. So I can call him Mike. Mike Ryan. You've also been in the front lines of managing a lot of risks, epidemics, acute risks to the global health for over 20 years. You're currently at the WHO as Deputy Executive Director of the Health Emergency Department. But you've been involved in the polio eradication campaigns. You've been involved in a lot of the outbreaks in many different parts of the world. So we're very, very happy that from that rich experience you're here as well. If I call him Michael, he knows we had a cue, then that there's some issue. And then finally, and last but not least, for this panel, I love to invite Mrs. Gabrielle Jacob, I have to say, from our Irish host country. You joined the Ireland Department of Health in 2009. And you've been in many assignments in the department, the Office for Elderly People, the Office for Disability Mental Health. But for this panel, what is very, very pertinent is that from 2012 to 2013, Ms. Jacob was the health attaché of the Permanent Mission of Ireland in Geneva, very much involved in the Irish EU presidency's discussions there on matters relating to the WHO. Now, in that same sort of time frame, you're really in the thick of it. From 2014 and 15, you were the department's lead on the health sector workforce planning And in 2015, together with Thailand, you co-chaired the expert advisory group on the first review of the relevance and effectiveness of the WH Global Code. So for all the topics that we will touch on and have touched on in this conference, I think you're very, very well positioned, and we're extremely happy that you could make time free to be in this panel. So one warm applause for Mrs. Gabrielle Jacob. Now, we had a little sort of cup of tea before this panel with the panelists, and we all agreed that we're first going to do a little round with you with one question. And that is the question, if you hear governance, who in this room, I'm going to come down because I can see you better if I'm standing, who in this room feels governance is their business? So who in this room feels that governance is their business? This gentleman is already saying it's all your business, so you guys who not raise your hand yet, you're sleeping, you're digesting your lunch, I don't know what you're doing. It's all our business is what you're saying. Now, who says it's all our business? It's actually the business of all of us. Governance is everybody's business. Okay. I think you tried your best, but I still see about 40% of people who are still thinking. Who says it's everybody's business, but it doesn't seem to be anybody's concern? There's a few people who say that. I saw a gentleman here. You say it's everybody's business, but nobody's concerned. What do you mean, sir?
Oh, I didn't say that. I said only everybody's the first one. That is the governance is everybody is concerned. We are here. We are part of the health community, so we have to be a part and parcel of the governing process, one way or the other.
Okay, so you feel it's everybody's business, and you also feel personally it's your business as well. Now, anybody else who says, well, you know, it's everybody's business, but it doesn't seem to be anybody's concern. Who is in that camp? I saw more hands. They all become afraid because this is going to be tuned to the world. You don't want to go on camera and say this. Is there anybody? No. You say it's everybody's business, but nobody's concern. I hold the mic.
Thank you. I would suggest that it's everyone's business, but the right people aren't necessarily concerned.
Okay, this is the third option. We do multiple choice here. So, who says it's everybody's business, but it's not the right people who are concerned? Who is in that camp? You are in that camp, okay. Why is that?
Je vais m'exprimer en français.
I will speak in French. Governance is everybody's business, but everybody thinks that it's the other person who's in charge.
First time we have French in this hall. Can we have an applause for the French speakers? He says, everybody says, you know, it's sort of everybody's business, but he says it seems that nobody really, you know, picks it up seriously enough. Now, the panel. So we have established it's everybody's business, and also it should be everybody's concern. Now the question is, what do we mean by governance? So I want to first also get a few impressions from the floor, because in my experience as working for this governance collaborative, I know that if you have 13 people in the room, there's 14 definitions of governance. So what do we actually mean by governance? Now I know there's somebody sitting here who's my colleague. I was standing already close to him. I said I would hit on him. Because you've been thinking, this is David Clark, and he's actually one of my nicest colleagues in the corridor. So I'll give you the privilege of clarifying a little bit why we have this confusion about governance definitions.
Well, a couple of years ago, I actually did some work on governance for the New Zealand Aid Programme, and we did a review of what all the different UN agencies, how they define governance. And surprise, surprise, they all have a different definition. And it really comes down to context and mandate. So I don't know whether or not there is one definition of governance, and I don't know whether there's any point in trying to come to a common definition. I think we're wasting our time. But I think we can probably agree on some core elements of governance which are really important to all the definitions.
So which would it, I mean, this is back into the question. So which ones would they be?
Well, I mean, I work on universal health coverage. So for me, governance is about the things that you need to do, the systems and processes and the rules that are in place that you need to achieve universal health coverage. Governance isn't an abstract concept. It has to be linked to an objective. So that's the focus of my work on governance.
So for you, it has to be linked to practices, not some sort of abstraction. All right, anybody else who says, well, you know, we don't have to come to one definition of governance, but we can maybe clarify a few dimensions that are really vital. Now, this is a challenge. I'm going to jog over to you. No, I can come to you. It is my exercise after lunch. So.
Thank you so much. So, Matthias Wismar, European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies. Governance is the way we make and implement public decisions, and it's got 5 components: transparency, accountability, participation, integrity, and capacity. Thank you very much.
Okay. This is the result of 30 years of study and being originally German. They ordered people. They organized people. So 5 very important dimensions. Now, the panelists had time to relax, also see what the sound quality is, because if you sit on that platform, you actually hear very badly. It's, so I don't know how much you caught from everything that was being said, but the opening question to you will be, because all of you are very much in the governance arena. So not only is it everybody's business, but it's your special business. So now, if that is the case, I'm increasing the suspense. If that's the case, why are we babbling so much about governance, and are we able to walk the talk? So for an opening firing shot, I think I'll start with Mike Ryan. Mike, are we walking the talk? Is governance just babble?
I think there is a large gap between the rhetoric and the reality. I like what my colleague said down there about governance must be destination driven, not process driven. So if you know your destination, you have some chance to get there. And for me, governance is about the mechanisms, the policies, the people. Everybody in a successful sports team knows their job. They're supposed to be excellent at their job. They're supposed to coordinate. They're managed. They share responsibility and accountability. And I think sometimes in health, we talk the talk, but as you said quite clearly, we don't walk that talk when it comes to implementation. So we fall short. We have good policies at the global level. We have good frameworks, even at national level. But sometimes it's difficult to translate that and transform that into something concrete and real, like our 2 colleagues here have been doing in their country context. So yes, I think there is a large gap between the rhetoric and the reality, and we have a responsibility collectively, because at the centre of all this are health workers. At the centre of all this are millions and millions and millions of people who have given their lives to support and serve the vulnerable, to serve those who have least, to serve the children of the world. And it's understanding that personal accountability that we all share to create an environment in which those health workers can thrive, can learn, can contribute. And I think that broader concept of governance, I think, is accepted. What we fail to do yet is turn that country by country into a reality.
As an opening remark, Dr. Jubber, actually the same question to you, but I'm looking at all the experience you had recently. So from the perspective of your recent work also on the committee in South Africa, do you feel we're walking the talk enough?
I think, like my colleague said, walking the talk is much more difficult than really conceptualizing it. However, for me, the main ingredient to succeed or to governance is to be able to articulate clearly a shared vision which outline a commonly defined end result and work backwards in terms of how to get there. So the key ingredient is to be able to find the right person in terms of leadership, to be able to provide stewardship that would really bring efforts amongst everybody that is concerned towards achieving the common goal. And for me, in terms of the recent work, that's been a good experience where I had really seen it taken from broader political decision to begin to articulate country and regional plans towards making sure that the global commitments are met.
Okay, we'll enter into the details of what happened recently in South Africa and how you worked on this, because it will be nice to hear in more detail while you're translating global agendas. So we'll come to that in a second, but I first want to turn to Ms. Gabriella, because she was in a similar situation in Ireland. Also, you had to somehow come up with walking the talk. Now, is that easy?
It's challenging, and I think because when we're thinking about health workers, we're also thinking intersectorally. Putting governance structures and processes in place that can span sectors, so that we're working with our colleagues in education, we're working with our colleagues in the labour market sector, that we're working across the system, as well as working vertically through the health system and stacking that up in terms of governance. It's a huge canvas to be working with, and the different sectors have their own complexities and their own challenges. So trying to find a common language to actually agree governance arrangements and structures and processes and principles through is challenging. But that's also the joy of the work, when that begins to come together. And it is that piece around translation from the global to the national and then to the local within that context.
So all of you, nobody's pessimistic. You say it's challenging, but actually it can be done. I'm also again looking at body language, you're still smiling. And, so basically you feel it's doable, but it's complex. Now can we start to unpack the cases that you represent, Dr. Jabu first. In the case of South Africa, just tell us a little bit about how that happened, what you're sketching, what actually happened, just as a story. Tell us the story of that committee.
The story goes like this. With the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 and the subsequent establishment of High-Level Commission on Health, Education and Economic Growth, South Africa was privileged to be quite key in that respect. As you would recall that the commission was co-chaired between South Africa and France, and being chaired by President Zuma in South Africa, it related to the core area that primarily driven by health, but involving other sectors as well. And we've been privileged through the leadership of our Secretary General to have been in the forefront of the development of this work. So in terms of the lessons that we have learned, we know that the Commission's report was adopted in December 2016, and it had 10 recommendations and action plan. So as South Africa being one of the co-chairs, immediately we took the report, and the key recommendation is that there needs to be political endorsement, which is the first step that relates to governance. So with political endorsement, then we needed to begin to say, how does it translate into real practical steps that is going to make a difference in terms of creating the required required jobs within the health sector as a driver of economic development. So within the country, the first step was to call intra-country, within the country, a multi-sectoral country meeting where the whole agenda was articulated and shared, and primarily amongst the various ministries within the government, to be able to understand what would be the role of labor, what would be the role of the employer, of greater part of civil servants, your public service administration, your economic sector, your treasury. So it was a meeting where everybody really got to understand what is this bigger agenda. And the next step then was to be able to take it to the regional meetings of the ministers, and the regional meeting of SADC ministers took place about a week ago in South Africa as well. And that meeting was preceded by a meeting of the technical team of HRH managers across the region, within the SADC region, who began to articulate and formulate proposals in terms of what is it that our ministers need to endorse for us to be able to implement the action plan within the next 5 years? And that report or those proposals were then tabled and considered by the ministers of health within the SADC region, and it begins to outline that we need to work within the existing structures, forming collaboration across the sectors, and kind of thinking of innovative ways that within the region we can be able to implement the action plan. What is also exciting is that being co-chaired between France and South Africa, even the Francophone countries have actually taken the same path, and they were able to come and share lessons in terms of how far they have gone and approaches in terms of developing their 5-year action plan that would ensure that the sentiments that are expressed in the 10 recommendations are translated in meaningful reality that creates the required jobs within the health sector as a way of contributing to economic development.
Okay, I'm very happy with this clear expose on how the steps were taken at governmental level, intergovernmental level, even bringing in your Francophone colleagues, having the experts there. Now, this is, of course, the beautiful logic of governments, bureaucracies, how they like to work. Now, you're also the chief nursing officer. You know that in some of the countries they're represented, there are all kinds of challenges with health workers, etc. You're a practical woman besides an administrative woman. So I can see in the smile on your face that you know the realities that underpin this discussion. So you have the very good bureaucratic processes to try and improve. And at the same time, you have striking nurses here and there. You have, so how in this commission work did the realities from the ground actually enter the rooms of, let's say, the high-level officials and experts?
Yes, the realities did find expression into debates and dialogue. And probably from the nursing point of view, we always take advantage that nursing as a sector provides a useful lens to actually understand the complex and dynamic interface between the context of care, the providers of care as the broader health professionals, and the recipients of care. And really, for us, we're able to then look into these global strategies, your HRH 2030, the HEEG report, and said, to what extent would it be then sensitive and address the realities that really comes from the context of care, the challenges in terms of providing decent work, the challenges in terms of continuous staff shortages, the challenges in terms of the education system, the challenges in terms of the gender equities, the challenges in terms of all the issues that we experience as providers of care in a manner that would enable us, when we get to the level of interfacing with the recipients of care, we are better placed to do that.
So now you were in it all, in a lot of the discussions. Could you give one concrete example where this way of operating in the committee actually struck you as a, you know, a senior professional as well, as something innovative, where you felt, well, because of the way we operated this, something really interesting came out?
For me, the innovation that really came with the work of the Commission is that for the first time to be able to meet as representatives of the various sectors, we've never really at a planning level include people like as specialists within the labor movement. You know, in this work there's strong presence and guidance from ILO in particular, and they are bringing a different perspective in terms of helping us understand labor market forces, which is not a common concept in terms of ourselves as providers. So for me, that was kind of innovative approach. The way they began to define decent jobs, you know, within the health sector, for me, that was also quite eye-opening. So really, the intersectoral approach for me was quite an innovative way of beginning to address health sector issues by contributing to the greater economic growth.
Thank you so much. I'm moving to Gabriella. You also said intersectorality. Now, from the Irish perspective, having been in Geneva yourself before, coming back, being involved in this agenda, working in an EU country, what was the interesting process steps that you actually saw, and where did you see the bottlenecks in this discussion?
I suppose our starting point was slightly different in terms of the Irish experience over the last decade has been very challenging in the context of the financial crisis. We had a moratorium on staff in our public health service for a number of years. Our numbers reduced substantially. It was a very difficult time nationally. And so as we began to emerge from that, we had to begin to think again about our workforce. When I came back from Geneva a number of years ago, it was actually very difficult to talk about workforce planning because... I'm sorry? Can you hear?
Some interesting noises, but okay.
So we had to begin a dialogue and find the place and the language and the contexts to have that dialogue with colleagues in our own sector and across the system. We found the WHO Global Code, which we were committed to, very, very helpful, along with all the other work that has come through the UN High-Level Commission and also the Global HRH strategy to assist us in that dialogue. And one of the things...
So can I interrupt you for a second here? So you said these codes were actually practical.
Yes.
For what you were doing. This morning we were talking about the human rights frameworks. And some people a little bit more removed from these frameworks might think this is all high-level legal stuff. Same with some of these codes. Some people might think they're highly sort of highbrow academic, whatever. You thought they were practical.
They are practical, but they require translation. I think...
Such as?
We use a very particular type of language in these documents, and that requires translation into the national context to reach a shared understanding of what they mean and what that means in terms of our own context nationally and at local level within a country, because it is a very particular type of language. I think the other thing that struck me about the process of developing our strategic framework, which was launched by our Minister on Tuesday, is that workforce planning is it's intersectoral, but it's also multidisciplinary. We needed colleagues who had human resource management experience. We needed colleagues who understood labour market dynamics. In ways, we're describing the same things, but we describe them differently. And we need all of our policies to work together to support the rebuilding of our health workforce and to support building a sustainable workforce for the future. So there's an intersectoral piece, but there's also a multidisciplinary piece. We needed to work with clinicians to get that perspective, researchers, so that we have a better understanding of the data and the information, so that we can then make decisions about the policies that we may need to apply nationally. So it is very much about collaboration, but different types of collaboration, intersectoral and multidisciplinary.
I'm happy you're still looking optimistic. For me, intersectoral and interdisciplinary are red flag words. The moment I hear them, I think complexity, slamming doors, turf wars, misunderstandings, people having no time to actually take the time to understand each other's language. So I'm a little bit of an old mama, and sometimes I get cynical. I'm not cynical here, but it's, and again, these are one of these process terms that are easily said, but not so easily done. So now, as an honest Irish lady, could you give a little bit of hint where the difficulties would be in the intersectorality, in the interdisciplinarity? Concretely from your experience, not mentioning names, but just...
Intersectorally, at a national level, and colleagues here will know this, every ministry has its own imperatives. It has its own strategies to deliver, it has its own action plans to deliver, and they work on different timelines. And there are different priorities, and some of those are political priorities, some of those are planning priorities, and somewhere within that you have to carve out a space where you have an agreed shared objective, going back to
how
our
did you do that?
point.
Because again, it sounds, each sentence you utter, it sounds more complex. Different timelines, different deliverables, different kinds of concerns in ministries, silos. So how does this play out?
I think the design process for something like the framework that we have developed is long. We were talking to this point at the Euro meeting at lunchtime yesterday. It is a long process and you cannot take shortcuts.
Can I stop you for a moment there?
Yeah.
I think this lesson should somewhere be in neon letters, no shortcuts. These are slow processes. Yeah. Everybody knows it, but in reality, we often, because they're slow processes, don't do them well. So I think this is, can we have an applause for this remark? Because I think this needs to be in people's minds.
And I think there was a point that a colleague made at a session yesterday, that quick agreement doesn't necessarily translate into implementation. So time spent in really understanding what the purpose of what you're doing is, developing that shared understanding of what the objective is, what the principles are that underpin it, are really important as strong foundations then to build together. And that principles discussion is very helpful in terms of thinking through the intersectoral and the multidisciplinary pieces, because multidisciplinary working is hard. We have different languages and we have different professional formation, so it is not easy.
Dr. Jabo, on the same topic, in your experience, what was the hardest to bring into the dialogue? The hardest group to bring in, or the hardest voice to bring in, or where do you felt most challenged? Because you also said that we want to be multisectoral, we want to be this. What was the most difficult to bring around the table?
The most difficult yet critical stakeholder is representatives of organized labor. Because quite often, once we start talking plans for them, which is a reality, the key issue is the context and the conditions within which HR has to find expression. And for us, that is always quite difficult, because as you come with grand plans that are not necessarily going to be implemented immediately, which requires a lot of planning, there is time to actually understand, assimilate and establish a common vision in terms of how does each of the parties stand to benefit from this joint effort. And unless that is not clear, it's very difficult to really work together. And for me, I think in this work, the global economic meltdown is an opportunity, because everybody has an inclination or commitment to say, what is it that I can be able to contribute to actually improve the economic status of my sector? So for me, it becomes a common platform where we have a shared vision.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mike, totally contrary to your nature, you have been very silent. I've met this gentleman this afternoon, and he's like my husband, I can tell you. But I saw you smile a few times. So what was going through your head? We have been discussing the cases of people who try to build governance structures as implementation structures also for these human resources for health agendas and the global code, which is a very important part of that same arena. Now, you've been around a bit. You're listening to these cases. I saw you smile. What were you thinking when you were smiling?
I was. Back to rhetoric. I love storytellers, and all Irish people love people who can tell a story. So that's where I was just enjoying a good story with a real point. I was interested in hearing when we talk about accountability. We always talk about accountability upwards. Who's accountable to me? And then who am I accountable to above? Accountability is the other way around, and I think we haven't got that right yet. Not so long ago, in a country I shan't name, but I was heavily involved in polio eradication and containing polio outbreaks, and in working with the government on writing an accountability framework, I drafted the first sentence of the framework, which said the government is primarily accountable to its children for the eradication of polio. And that one sentence caused such controversy, because the understanding of accountability in that context was the other way. Who's accountable to us? And I think we have to, and I was hearing that there. I think the other thing that was going through my mind was ownership. You have to own the problem. It's not somebody else's problem. You have to own the problem. So human resources for health is a problem for a local district medical officer. It's a problem for a provincial health minister. It's a problem for a minister of health. It's a problem for the World Health Organization. But you have to understand in that ownership, which piece, which part of the solution am I? Which part of what am I bringing? What am I accountable to deliver? When I wake up in the morning, what's my job today to advance that agenda? When I go to bed at night, have I done what I committed to do this morning? So that journey breaks down into small steps, achievable things that can be done, and we stop talking about the destination. That's what the whole policy thing is about, agreeing the destination. But getting there is step by step, the hard miles. And I think that's what I was hearing, that process of translating global policy. And WHO makes lots of global policy, and the member states come together, and we issue policy like parking tickets, you know. So, you know, but WHO is nothing more than a collection of member states that seek to share a vision for health, to seek to share a vision for decent work for health workers. And, you know, I also, as we were thinking, I thought too that Ireland and South Africa and many other countries, despite the criticisms, are very lucky to have a government. They're very lucky to be conflict-free, because millions and millions of people live in countries that are fragile, that are conflict-affected, that are vulnerable, that have deep problems with basic governance. Never mind governance for health or governance for human resources for health. There's an issue of governance. And if we're ever to achieve the SDGs, over 50%, 60% of the morbidity and mortality is concentrated in 30 countries where government is a major issue, never mind governance. So I think I was listening to that and wondering if we could have this in those countries, maybe we'd make more progress on the SDGs.
One of the things you said was how we wake up in the morning and we ask ourselves, how are we part of, contribute positively to the agenda? Another question, if you have not slept very well, could be, how are we part of the problem? Because I'm constantly trying to keep the stories in mind, like the stories we heard on the first day. There were, from the Youth Forum, there were a lot of people who were coming out, and it was global storytelling. So situations where, despite a lot of good plans and even existing governments, people are still facing harassment on the work floor, no staff in certain places, all kinds of issues, families being threatened because they stand up against authorities that are. And so those are the tougher realities that I think also a lot of people experience, even in environments where there are functioning governments. So now my question is constantly like, what are we doing here in terms of helping, trying to design good frameworks, good thinking, good clarity about concepts, good mechanisms? How are they going to help that young doctor that I was talking to, just now, who said, I have to sometimes watch out if I open my big mouth, because I like to improve the conditions of young health workers in my country, but some people are not so in favor of that. Or they might be in favor, but they're not in favor of the way he's proposing and his young generation is proposing to do it. So what do we do with that? Because I mean, we need to, I think, and this is what I liked about your downward accountability. And there was a question, I think it was a lady in the hall on the first evening who said, how accountable are we all together? And what are the mechanisms to improve there where we're not accountable enough? So that would be, I think, my second round of questions to all of you. In the processes that you're in, like you have talked with in the Irish setting, were there moments where you thought, actually, even in our relatively well-governed environment, we're not accountable enough?
Yes. And I think it's accountability, and this comes back to the nature of governance. We are all involved in governance. We all need to be accountable, whether we're at local level, whether we're at regional level, whether we're at national level or internationally. And there are formal mechanisms in the system. So, for example, at global level, we have the National Reporting Instrument under the Global Code with the third round of reporting next year. That's one mechanism that we will be required to report on, and which is an extremely important channel of international accountability. And reporting on the code is expanding. More countries are responding every time, so that is a very important mechanism. At national level, in terms of our own strategic framework, we have built in accountability to the Minister for Health on an annual basis for the implementation of the strategic framework. And as we operationalise the framework, we have to build in accountability down through the health system and cross-sectorally for what we're doing. At a very local level, we are all, as individuals, we experience life as an individual on a day-to-day basis on a ward or in a clinical setting, or in my case in an office. And there are very important pieces which came up in our discussion yesterday, again at the Euro session, around employee health and well-being. Now I can only speak in terms of my context, and I appreciate that in fragile states it's very different, but at least in our context we do need to think about the health and well-being of our health workers, ensuring that they're supported on a day-to-day basis in the environment that they're working in. So, and there is an accountability at local level and at national level to those health workers to ensure that.
Thanks. Same question to you, Dr. Jabu. So in the processes you have been actively involved with over the last couple of years around this agenda, were there moments you came home and you said to your family, I've had such a bad day because I realize we're not accountable enough?
Let me rather quote a recent experience where I really felt that for the first time I'm not sure whether I'm proud of my portfolio as the first nurse in the country. And that really related to challenges in terms of service delivery in hospitals, and that relates to management of specific ailment, because I really don't want to be specific. And that really led to a number of specialist doctors leaving public sector. So we came to this one situation, and we find one doctor who's still remaining. And for me, the expression that really gave me a sleepless night was that it's a pity that people think that we are living because we want money in private sector. The reason we are living in public sector is because we lack basic tools to make difference in our patients. We can work even if we are few, provided we have the right equipment to be able to make a difference. When that is taken away, then my role as a doctor is depleted. For me, that was very profound. And it really speaks to providing the tools of trade, to be able to understand that some of the things health workers can really contend with, some of the difficult issues, but the major things that limit their ability to exercise what they are skilled and competent to do, and that is making a difference in the lives of people. When that is constrained, then the system stops.
That, I can see that was, yeah, I think that's... Now, also taking that conversation to the rest of the hall, we said in the beginning we feel, let's say all of us feel this afternoon at least, that governance is everybody's business. So in the concrete case you're just describing, of course we were not going to analyze the whole ins and outs of the South African health system. That would take a long time and careful reflection. But I think a lot of us in this room are experienced enough to also know that there are a lot of complexities in systems. And most of the time, a lot of people know where the complexities are. They also know where the potential solutions would be, but somehow they're not happening because some people are benefiting from the chaos. And not saying this to South Africa, but generally in the world. Some people benefit from chaos. So again, with this doctor in mind, I try to keep him in the front of my mind during this conversation. If we say governance is everybody's business, how would you tackle the situation you just sketched, where you came home and you really felt, I could see as a professional, you felt really sorrowed? How did you tackle that? How did you then say, okay, it is my responsibility as a chief nursing officer, you have power, but of course you cannot do everything alone. So how do you go about situations like that from where you are now?
It's quite difficult because, like you say, that accountability is everybody's business. for me, in terms of the case or the scenario that I have painted, is that we need to establish a common understanding that health sector cannot be managed and resourced like any other government department. You know, when we have potholes in the road, that can wait. But if we don't have ventilators in ICUs, people die. So if we can be able to share that common accountability and be able to convince or convey quite compelling arguments with people who are providing resources into the health sector, to begin to say the performance of the health sector require different resources from other sectors. And for me, I think that is what you would need to be able to do.
I see Mike nods. So the same question, because we're talking also a little bit here as colleagues all together. We're all part of the problem and we can be part of the solution. So this is the general spirit here. We're not finger pointing. We're basically trying to get at where are we part of the problem and where are we part of the solution? Now you're at WHO. You could be part of the solution.
Part of the problem too. It's interesting, we were talking beforehand about this. The one thing a long-term strategy has to be able to do is to engage, build and maintain the confidence of the workers it's directed at. So if you keep telling me I'm coming back in 5 years with the perfect system, and in 4 years' time you say, oh, it'll be another 3 years, oh, by the way, it'll be another decade, these kinds of strategies have to be able to do two things at one time. They've got to provide a long-term roadmap, but they've got to be able to fix the ventilator problem. They have to show that these strategies can immediately start to show green shoots, that you can begin to address the most pressing issues, and that you're able to put those, that it's not so much systems think. I often think we take an engineering analysis to the health system, and we try and break the health system down into a load of boxes and put lines between it all, and it all looks great. But the health system is very organic. It exists in the context of economic crisis, conflict, issues of broader governance. So it's got to be resilient, it's got to be adaptable, and strategies equally have to be, the strategy itself has to be adaptable, resilient. It's got to suffer defeats, pick itself up, move on. And too many strategies fail because they hit some kind of a roadblock and then everyone forgets about it. So we have to have a way to get through. And going back to your story on the health worker, all systems punish the whistleblower. Whatever we might say about it, they do. And those who speak out and identify issues are quickly rounded on by the system because you're actually threatening the system. We have got to change the mindset that surfacing the issues through strategy implementation is the most important thing that needs to happen.
So when people do you not feel I'm sorry, I do work as a consultant now for WHO. I'm not an employee of WHO, but I like the organization because it's also human beings. What I see a lot is people also in organizations, not only WHO, but organizations are bound by all kinds of stuff. If you talk to them as professionals, they talk like you're talking now. They say we can see the problem, we also see we actually have already created solutions. They're often privileged people because they can see a lot of countries. So how can we move to that side, also of the humanity of international institutions, where people are a bit more brave and say, that's what keeps us from doing the right thing. We know, a lot of people know what the right thing is. So what would you say to that? Because I think we need to start moving more in that direction. Otherwise we're just doing ritualistic
I think it's the single biggest missing ingredient in public health policy at all levels of the system, including at the global level, is courage.
Can we have an applause for this one? Now, this is my cue, because I know I have spoken on the marketplace with a lot of you, and I actually know there are a lot of courageous people in this room, so this is your moment. Because what we've heard so far, they're actually in the plans that are, the ILO plans, the global codes, there are beautiful, well thought through mechanisms. A lot of mechanisms are there to do good governance. It's not like we lack. There's a lot of people that actually also know where the problems are. Senior people like we see here on the platform who actually know exactly. If I would have a cup of tea with Dr. Jabu, she could tell me everything about the whole region. You're a very experienced person and also somebody with a good heart. Now, so that is all in place. So what can we do to become more brave? So I'm going to start here, this gentleman. And I'm very sorry I have to lean over you. Is that, I don't want to be rude. And in this Me Too era, you have to be very careful about touching.
Yes, my name is Dr. Oluga from Kenya. I lead the Doctors Union. And I think that the statement about courage is very encouraging. And I want just to tell us a few things about what we can do about that courage, because I think we have the good systems, we have the good policies, we have everything. And trying to make it very simple, some of us, we have families. And in a family, there's a father, mother, there's children. And this father and mother, they provide for the children. They bring food every day, they cook, they give them clothing, they make sure there's a shelter, they make sure they do their homework, they are going to school. There's that level of responsibility because they feel that there's that connection, that this is my responsibility. And that gives them the courage to go out there and do everything possible to look for jobs. Sometimes when they don't find those jobs, to go do menial jobs and, you know, just to make sure that they meet their obligations. So what is lacking in the health sector and in the health systems, and I'll say this because it's true for very many countries, but particularly true for low and middle income countries, is that we have a father, we have a mother. Most of these father and mothers are government. They have zero connection to the healthcare system. So you have children who are either healthcare workers and patients, but the father and the mother are absent. So they don't give food, they don't give clothing, they don't have any connection because they don't eat in that house in the first place. When they are sick, they go to another house to eat. They go to treat themselves outside, and therefore they lack the courage to, and the obligation and the connection to treat the healthcare system. And that's the simplest. So we talk about very nice things. We come to these conferences and we're going to do declarations. But when the father and the mother is absent, the children are not going to eat. They're not going to be clothed. Thank you.
Somehow I had to think of Home Alone 3, but I don't know whether you saw that film ever. But no, but I don't want to. Very, very vital remark. Very vital remark. I'm going to go to this gentleman here. He's Dr. Abdulrahim from Sudan, Deputy Undersecretary of the Ministry of Health. Now, listening to this conversation, are we brave enough? And can we be brave as people in the health sphere? What hampers people from being more brave?
I think we are not brave enough because I think it is always about accountability of the system, accountability of the organization itself. Because if you see most of the organization, their vision, their mission, there is a beautiful word in that vision, that mission, but they are not implementing it. Because if there is a system of accountability within this organization, someone will come and say, you are not doing this the right way, you are not doing this the good way. So we think we have to foster accountability system within the organization itself, whether it is at local level, federal level, or international level. Accountability system is very important for us, and we have to encourage the employee to come up and say what do they think senior people doing, are they doing right things or not, so this is very important.
Can I ask you, so what the gentleman from Kenya there was saying, his criticism as a young doctor is a lot of the people who are responsible for the health system are eating someplace else. They're going someplace else. I think that is a valid point of criticism. If you do not feel ownership enough of the future of the system, what will happen? Now you are in a position of power where you are. So how do you respond to a young doctor like that who says that?
I think we need to give these young people the trust on the system itself. If they're not going to trust the system, they're not going to trust the future which is going to be given by this system. So trust is very important. But sometimes it's very difficult to give them this trust, because the trust is depends on the way you are doing things, whether you are speaking yourself or whether you are trying just to please the others, the government, the higher politicians and these sort of things. But I think at least for the technical leaders, I'm not talking about the political leader, they have to give this trust to the young people, trust on the future, trust on the system itself. This is very important. Well,
I thank you for these words, and since they're on camera now and they've gone through the whole world, so this is now a very important statement. We need to create spaces of trust, so that the young doctor came up to me over lunch, talking to me about the harassment that he experienced while he was speaking out to the local authorities. Those people can actually go somewhere, there's safe places, we need to create those places together. And people in high-level positions like yourself, I think that is the huge responsibility for all the seniors, to create these spaces. So can we make a Dublin declaration that we're going to work on this one? I think that would be actually absolutely vital. So I'm very happy that you said that. Thank you so much. There was one other.
Hi. As a community health worker, I think I've been doing this for about 24 years, and I think for the longest time I was afraid of the upper management, or fearful. I knew exactly what to do in the community and how to bring them resources, but then I got to a point, you know, I can only bring them so many resources, but where can I make the change? Because the resources that I bring to them are making change to them on an everyday life, but not necessarily for the future. So as a community health worker, I thought, you know, I need to stop being afraid of asking for more for them. And I feel really, as soon as I stop being afraid and not necessarily demanding, but asking and saying, this is our right, this is a right for the community, I really started seeing changes. So, yeah.
I'm so happy with this. Actually, this also deserves an applause, because what you're saying, at some point you have to claim your space. And not in a violent manner necessarily, but you have to claim your space. Because some spaces are not being given to you on a golden plate. I was young once, you wouldn't say that, but you know, at some point I was young. And if you start life with thinking things will be offered to me on a golden plate, you never get anywhere. So you have to claim your space, and you remind us very clearly of that. Yes?
I just want to emphasize the ethical considerations. As we talk about governance and all of these things, we have been discussing a lot. But I think we need to really put it into that framework and consider those ethical things that we need to think about, then we can be more transparent and more accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'll stay with you. The question that is now being posed to all of you was, how can we be more brave? Now, in your own professional experience, because you look like you're a senior person. In your own experience, can you give hints? Do you feel yourself you're brave enough all the time? Can you give hints on how to be brave?
Okay. But it is very important actually to speak up. But in order to speak up, you also have to be capable and you have to be knowledgeable. And one of the things that I always emphasize is the need to get the data and to get the evidence. For me, one of the things that I have found worked with the Ministry of Health, you know, people always say the Ministry of Health is whatever happening. But I have found out that if I can get the correct evidence and the right explanation, and everybody wants to see benefits. So if you can talk about that with the evidence that show that this making progress, they tend to understand you, and that's one of the ways of being brave, not just shouting about everything, but really knowing what you are talking about and being very capable. Thank you.
So what you're saying is being brave also is hard work, because you need to be knowledgeable. You cannot just shout from and shoot from the hip. Remco, you have to come this way. I'll hand you the microphone if you promise 1 minute.
Yes, the word that I have not heard so far is politics. Governance is also about politics and political engagement, and realizing that we need to engage with political values and with the battles that exist in society and the different values, and that our voice needs to be represented also by those in parliament and in government who can take our cause forward. This is modeling true, this is difficult, but this is the hard way and we should not avoid it. Politics is often seen as a problem, but it's also part of the solution. So I would like to make that cause.
Well, of course, I think many people in the room, they acknowledge and recognize that what we're talking about is political economy of health. We're basically talking about tough stuff.
Thank you. Samson Olum from Uganda. I want to re-echo the statement by my brother there from Kenya. Actually, I want to add that when it comes to low and middle-income countries, as you say that we have the mom, we have the dad. And I want to add that we have the uncle. And the uncle are our partners, the donors. That they go to these countries, they cook the food, they serve the food, but they don't eat the food. They'll excuse themselves. So I'll give you an example. In my country, we have UPE, Universal Primary Education, but go and do an analysis and see how many government officials will take their children to these UPE schools. They'll take their children to private schools. So how would you expect UPE policy to be effective? How do you expect the education standard to be effective? So similarly, it resonates with the health system, that the health system is not going to be consumed by the mother and the father and the uncle. When they're sick, they'll go to developed countries to seek for health care. And then it is the children to partake of this. So it's a whole complex system. Now, when it comes to bravery, the politics comes into play. As I speak now, our doctors, our health workers are on strike. And if you've been reading the development, it's quite different where the government has called in the army and the police to take over the health system. So it's quite a complex. So you may bring out your head that you're brave, but you don't know what the repercussion is. So in other words, the mother, the father, and the uncle, and you know what I mean by the uncle, need to sit and rethink the system. If need be, restructure the system or strengthen the system to make it more effective.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more comments. I'll come to you, but I also saw one hand here because I want to make a loop. But that comment is evaporated, so you'll be the final one. Come to that side if you can, so we can. I'll give it to you.
Hi, Erica Frank. I'm the founder and president of NextGenU. And I don't understand why, in the face of huge HRH deficits, more governments haven't bravely pushed, as you're suggesting, to have more efficient education. NextGenU is a small NGO, but we've become essentially the world's globally first free university, and we're even launching a globally free degree, a master's in public health. I don't understand, though, why governments aren't insisting that traditional universities, which rely on governments for their sustenance and accreditation, work faster to fix our HRH deficits with such tested and readily available tools.
Thank you, and I think the final comment is coming from
Marcel Claquin, again. I'm known to have a big mouth, also to speak up. I would like to take another dimension in this discussion. And I think, again, like I said yesterday, during the other plenary, I think we had very good insight from the people from ILO. I love when he said, it's about what the society, what we want as a society, what values we put, on the health workforce and on the health of individuals. I think we need to go back and remind us every day that we are all human beings. And when you look at the other person, it's an other human being. And that other being has rights, has the same right as I have. And I think it starts with the very basic, and it starts with the very basic education and the way we grow, the way we interact with each other. And I think we need to bring that into our own organization. I think politics is past. We need to move out from the politics. We need to go back to our humanity. For me, when I was listening to you, I was thinking, this reminds me of the fight for the civic movement in the United States, where the black people fight for their right to be recognized as human beings. So I think human health workers, we also need, and the community again, we all need to fight for our rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So we got comments in this panel on the level of, if we say everybody's business. Governance is everybody's business. So we have comments at the level of everybody's individual stanza on what is this health workers' agenda about. It is about human rights, it is about decency, it is about people being treated and being able to work as human beings and not as slaves of something. So I think that is the more individual level. There is the deeply structural level that also Remco was referring to, and a few people in the panel made comments about the political structures that form our institutions or international institutions, etc., and that in some cases might be part of the problem rather than the solution. Now, within that huge span, I want to ask the panel as a final round. We're talking here now for 3 days on how to move seriously, keeping these considerations in mind, on the human resources for health agenda, seriously. So not just producing documents, not just having committees, not just having conferences even, but taking the next steps that make a concrete difference in the life of that gentleman. Now, I'm starting this round with Mike first. As a WHO old hack, if I may say so. You've been around the block. You've been there.
I've only been back a few months. And speaking of big mouths, when I tried to convince my wife to come back to Geneva, she said, Mike, she said, you have a 2-year contract and a big mouth. So she's waiting to see, but then my big mouth gets me in trouble. It usually does. If I would say one thing, and I reflect on my most recent experience on polio eradication in Pakistan. 325 or 245 frontline workers bravely facing attacks and death to deliver a vital vaccine to all the children of Pakistan every month. And the way in which the government of Pakistan and its partners turned around that program was putting accountability and performance management at the center of the agenda. And then the absolutely relentless daily process of identifying problems, surfacing the issues and addressing those problems day by day, and going by one of our colleagues said, with the evidence, with the measurement, measure, 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 surface the problems, fix the problems, move on to the next day. This is one step in front. There is no magic solution. If there was the perfect strategy, if we could pull something out of the air, the perfect checkbook, or the perfect strategy and the perfect policy, this would be done by now. It's not done because it's difficult. It's not done because it takes that relentless pursuit of excellence. And in any high-performance endeavor in the world, it is that management by incremental gain. Get 1% more today, 1% more tomorrow, and eventually you get there. And I think we have to take that really practical approach to the problem. And as this will be the last time I'll speak, I think we need to reflect on the real heroes. When I said we need more courage, I forgot to put the caveat in. The real heroes and the really courageous people in this are the frontline health workers. My Ugandan colleague who spoke, you know, we lost 13 nurses in an Ebola outbreak in Uganda in 2000. My great friend Matthew Lukuya. We lost 500 health workers in the Ebola response in West Africa. We lost 65 health workers in the front lines of polio response in Pakistan in 2 years alone. In Yemen today, there are hundreds of thousands of health workers working unpaid with their health facilities been actively attacked and re-attacked in double tap attacks. We owe that frontline worker base, we owe them. We owe them our loyalty. We owe them our minds, we owe them that relentless pursuit. Because human resources for health is about them, it's not about us, it's not about the policymakers. We make it too much about us. So I think if we could refocus on what we're trying to achieve and just surface the problems, fix the problems, and measure, measure, measure. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the fact that all this is taped. It's going to go online. I will repeat it. Gabriella, same question to you. So from what you've listened now to, where do you feel we really now need to move next?
When I was listening to the discussion around courage, I wrote down 2 other words, and they're tenacity and patience. Tenacity, and this speaks to Mike's point about relentlessly, day after day, one foot in front of the other. You have to have that tenacity and that conviction that this is the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do for health workers. This is the right thing to do for patients, because that's ultimately what this is about. At a very practical level, a national strategic framework is very helpful, but it actually has to build from the bottom up. So picking up on Mike's point around we need to have long-term planning but be able to build in shorter-term resilience, we need to think about shorter-term actions at the local level, which then support the data and information that are required for longer-term planning at national level. So at a very practical level, what we're trying to build in our approach is that we're thinking about 1- and 3-year planning at the local level, so we have a really strong sense of what's happening on the ground in our services, and then we can seek to identify what solutions can be put in place in the shorter term to support and retain and make our workforce more resilient and more sustainable for the future at that practical level, while we're trying to build a longer term infrastructure. So there's a piece around thinking around 2 or 3 different time horizons all at the same time. We need to be thinking about 1 to 3 years, 5 years and 10 years plus, so that we're building in a couple of different focuses to what we're doing, because Mike's right. For all of us, it all sounds lovely if we're talking 10 years down the line, but people need solutions now. They need solutions in the next period, and we have to be able to respond to that through our work as we build this framework, and not just be thinking about the distant future, combined with tenacity and conviction.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for sharing all the experiences that came out of a bit of tenacity on your part, because I know what this kind of work might actually be also in the Irish context. It's been a lot of hard work. Now finally, Dr. Ibu, question to you, same question. You heard the remarks about courageous behavior. What did you pick up from the floor in their remarks, and where does that help you to expand even on this agenda?
Thanks for the contribution from the floor. And I think for me, in addition to tenacity and courage and evidence that seem to be coming from the floor, I would really include ability to communicate using evidence and developing compelling arguments that would be able to advance positions of frontline providers, because all evidence of what works or does not work come from day-to-day experiences of health workers. And if you can find platform for expressing that experience, that evidence in actually shaping what we do.
Thank you so much. To quickly sum up, we heard some about what is already happening in the description of the cases from South Africa, the South African region, Ireland. We heard that people are trying to actually, on the basis of the beautiful discussions that have been around the human resources in health agendas, to start to implement this and move towards more intersectorality, more interdisciplinarity, more implication of people about who this actually is, communities and health workers, and not just keep these discussions at a kind of government level. So we heard that that is ongoing and probably ongoing in many places. We also heard a tension, that is an old tension, but I think it cannot be stressed enough, between these laudable long-term international discussions about frameworks, mechanisms, instruments, of which there are increasingly practical examples there. The tension between that and the very, very urgent hardship that some people are suffering, actually quite a lot of people are confronting, that have to do with bad governance. We heard, and I think that is also not news to people, that this is about the political economy of health. And that none of us is outside that story, we're all in it. Everybody can be part of the solution, everybody can be part of the problem. And most of the time we're both. And we know why we're in certain systems, that we know we should not maybe in there, but we still are. So there's no finger pointing. This is part of the humanity that Makhanya was also talking about. We're no angels. All of us, we are human beings. So we have to start fundamentally shifting the discourse again and say we are human beings all together. This is a very good point that was made in that corner. And at the same time, we're dealing with institutional frames and power inequities and a political economy that might be quite detrimental and maybe not moving the agenda very much. Now, this was the warming up session. In the breakouts, you're going to talk about all kinds of concrete examples because I know how much expertise is in this hall. But I want to thank you and also people who have come up to us in between the meetings for their frankness. And it is very clear from Mike's remarks, from all the other remarks, that people are very, very aware that this is not simple. And this is tough stuff for a lot of people. But if we start, and I think that is the final remark I would like to make here as a sort of final conclusion, at least my final conclusion. If we would be brave enough to start again and say, we're all human beings together, we live on average, 70, 80 years. That's it. So can we please, with the collective intelligence that is there, do a little bit better than we're currently doing, institutionally and individually. In institutional responsibility, individual responsibilities. We're all in it. Nobody's exempted. So I think that would already be a fairly good starting point for new conversations, new safe spaces, new spaces of creative dialogue, new environments where people get together who normally before did not talk to each other. So I think if that has come out of this little exchange, I want to thank the panelists very much for their inspirational words. I think we're very, very happy that you were here. So one final applause for all of you. And I want to thank you for being present here. We have a tea break now. Let me remind you, 5:30 in this hall, the Youth Forum will give their idea of how the future should look. 6:30, the buses will take you to Dublin Castle. And don't miss that, because that's an absolutely fantastic evening that is ahead of you, all offered by the Irish government. Thank you.